when I realised that my journey to Nava starts this Thursday, I kind of panicked and realised that I have to step it up and start producing if I wanted my new outfit to be finished before I got there. So, because of that, last week mostly to me was sewing and sewing and sewing and sewing and sewing and sewing, and so it was a bit difficult to be creative about this week's video, I must tell you. But then I thought, why not just tell people about what I'm sewing and the history behind that? As I told you in the extra video I uploaded last week, I am going to Nava this Thursday. Nava is in Estonia, situated very close to the Russian border, and there reenactors from many countries will stage the Battle of Nava, the year of 1700. This battle was one of the first parts of the Great Northern War. Here are my friends the Carolians, or Carolinians, depending which translator you listen to. And yes, one of them is a priest, but I couldn't photograph the actual event since I kind of was in it. I will, in later videos, get into the parts that women had in war, because they did, you know. But that's for later. Now for the clothing. This girl, standing behind me there, she has been wearing different clothes for every video that I've uploaded so far. But today she starts all naked, and I will dress her and then talk about the clothes she's getting on as she's getting dressed. So we'll have to start with a särk. The closest translation I've found to the word särk is kameez, but I don't think that is really accurate. It doesn't have the right ring in my ears, you know, because a kameez seems much more fancy, as särk is more a working garment, you know. So I will just use the word särk. It's easiest for me, and you'll just have to get used to it. The särk is known as early as in the Viking era, roughly around 1,000 years ago, something like that. But then it was worn both by men and women, and it wasn't necessarily an undergarment either. But in medieval times, it started to mean just underwear for women. If any of my Viking reenactor friends that actually have English as their main language knows, what do you call the särk in English? Is it a kameez or is it just a dress? I'm curious, please tell me, because I want to learn, as usual. It's thought that the word berserk is a combination between the word for bear and särk. The berserks were warriors either dressed in bear skins for clothes, or warriors with the fury of a bear, but we don't really know what's meant by it. But the word berserk comes from the same place as this garment. It's made from linen fabric, and I talked last week about how that is produced, so I will not do that now. If you are curious about that, you'll have to go and watch last week's video. Let's move on to the skirt. This one, being a bit more fancy than my everyday skirt, is made from worsted wool fabric. Worsted wool is what's needed to make really fine fabric. In my last video I showed you my cards, and cards are used in the production of thicker and also warmer but coarser woolen fabrics. To get fabrics really, really fine, the wool needs to be combed instead of carded. That makes the hair run the same way, and also the shorter hairs are being sorted out in this process. And this makes it possible to spin really thin and smooth threads. The length of the skirt and also its stripe says quite a lot of its wearer, actually, if you know what to look for. When we talk about the 1700s, we actually talk about 3 different fashion trends. And they were in the use differently depending on where in the social hierarchy you were. The 1700s starts in the Baroque era, and then we go into the Rococo era. And at the end of the 1700s, we have the Empire, or Empire, I don't know what you call it in English. Empire with the high waistlines, you know, and if you talk about Jane Austen and things like that, that's Empire. And that starts in the late 1700s. And since I want my clothes to be as versatile as possible, I tend to keep within the Rococo era, because then we can kind of cheat a bit into the Baroque era and cheat a bit into the Empire era. This skirt tells me that someone tries to look a bit richer than they actually were. This fabric is trying to mimic a finer kind of fabric called Calmanco or Kalamink, in Swedish Calmink. These fabrics were manufactured in Norwich in England, and just about only there what I've been able to find. Calamink is woven as satin. You didn't know that, did you? That satin is a weaving technique, not a different kind of material. After the weaving, the surface of the fabric was glazed to shine. They made the Calamink fabrics in many different patterns, but the most popular here, among the country folks, were the striped ones. Here we have samples of real Calaminks from the factory in Norwich, and you see the lovely shaded colours in the striping of this fabric. But if they couldn't afford enough of the Norwich fabric so that it would be enough for a skirt, they could weave themselves fabric that reminded of the real thing. That was the Calamink. Time for the apron. Here we are also dealing with a fabric that was bought, and everything bought was seen as much fancier than the things they could make themselves at home. This is printed cotton, and the further back in history you go, the more fancy the cotton fabrics are. And of course it depends on where you are. If you live in a place where they actually grow cotton, that's not very fancy, that's for your everyday clothes. But here, no one could grow cotton, and we didn't import it to process it ourselves. These kinds of fabrics, the Calamink and the printed cotton, was something that everyone tried to have at least small pieces of. So if you couldn't afford enough fabric for an entire apron or an entire skirt, perhaps you could afford enough for a bodice or for a hat or for just a scarf or something like that. People that were really well off, of course, also could buy things from silk. But most people couldn't afford that, or at least they could just afford small pieces of it. But there is one garment missing on her, so I'll have to get her into her bodice. It's easier to put these clothes on an actual person than it is on this mannequin. So, there, she's dressed. The bodice is also made from worsted wool and linen on the inside. And looking at my now fully dressed mannequin, you wonder, of course, am I now finished with all my clothes for my trip to Nava? And I answer to that, finished? It never get finished. No, 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 no. I'll have to make another sark, and I think I'm also making a hat from another printed cotton, and perhaps I'm also making a hat to wear under that hat with lace on it. But I never get finished, so no, I will not be finished when I come to Nava. But I hope that you learned something new today. See you soon, I hope. Bye!